Max Verstappen, you are a two-time world champion. Well, that's what we would have heard over the radio if the FIA didn't make rules which are hard to interpret, but instead we got Johnny Herbert telling Verstappen the news that he's become a back-to-back world champion. But nevertheless, it's been clear that he has been one of the best drivers on the grid this past couple of seasons. He has dominated this season with Red Bull and he's just one win away from equaling a record for the most wins in a season, and there's still 4 more races to go until the season is over. In 2021, Verstappen won his first championship under some controversial circumstances, but this season really developed him as a driver, and in 2022, he has improved even more to become one of the best on the grid. Do you think Max is one of the greatest drivers ever now? Or do you think he has to win a few more championships to get that title? Let me know your answers in the comments below. Now, before we get into Verstappen becoming a 2-time world champion, let's have a quick look at the 2021 season and how it developed him massively. Before the season started, there was a lot of speculation that Red Bull would be able to fight for the championship, and they were able to, and Verstappen and Hamilton would fight for the championship right until the end. Verstappen had to cut out a lot of errors he would make in the past, such as going for a gap that he was more than likely not going to make it, or just silly little errors. In 2021, he had very few errors and it allowed him to be ahead most of the times of a 7-time world champion. The final race he won on the final lap in controversial matter, which we'll not talk about here because we've covered that before. But this season was the start. Hopefully that Verstappen would finally have the skills and experience to fight for the championships. But he needed the car underneath him. 2021 clearly showed that if you give Verstappen a race-winning car throughout the whole season, he can win and fight. And he took home his first of many championships that Red Bull would have hoped. Even many people believe that Abu Dhabi was manipulated and Lewis Hamilton should have won the race. That didn't take away Verstappen's championship and how, through the whole of the season, he dominated at times such as in Austria. And even though Hamilton pushed him right to the wire, he probably deserved the championship as much as Hamilton, which is a big achievement compared to the previous seasons. Do you think that the 2021 season helped Verstappen massively to become the driver he is today? Or has he always had these skills, but he's not been able to show them in a championship winning car yet? Well, going into 2022, a lot of people predicted that Red Bull would fall behind the pack due to them putting a lot of focus on the 2021 car and giving Max the best chance to win his first championship, which he did. But coming into the pre-season of Bahrain, a lot of people saw that Ferrari and Red Bull cars looked stable and the fastest on the grid, with Mercedes struggling with the porpoising, which hurt their performance in the early stages of the season. Well, going into the first race in Bahrain in March, this was a case of Ferrari of Charles Leclerc and Red Bull of Max Verstappen fighting out for pole position, but Leclerc just edged it, with Verstappen behind in P2. The race would see the two fight for P1, but after a safety car for Red Bull, both Verstappen and Perez DNF'd, meaning that Ferrari took home a 1-2 finish to start the season. In Australia, Max would have another DNF, whilst Leclerc took home a Grand Slam. And at this point, many people were ruling Red Bull out of the championship, but this was not the case at all. Verstappen would fight back from this early setback and he would go on and win the next 3 races, whilst in the time, Leclerc would have a P2, a P4 and a DNF for reliability. Now, the ball was back in Red Bull's court. Perez would go on and win the Monaco Grand Prix in a weekend where Verstappen was well off the pace of his teammate, and this was probably his worst weekend of the whole season so far. In the next 2 rounds in Baku and Canada, Verstappen would win both, and in Baku, both the Ferraris had reliability issues which really put them on the back foot and gave all the momentum and confidence to Red Bull going into the British Grand Prix. However, in this race, Verstappen would have some early floor damage, which meant he would finish P7, and the Ferrari should have taken home a 1-2 finish, but due to mistakes in strategy calls, Sainz would win the race and Leclerc would finish in P4 after leading a lot of the race. And this was when people thought Ferrari had blown their chances with Leclerc, but also in the Constructors' Championship fight. In Austria, Leclerc would get his first win since Australia, but it should have been another 1-2 for the team. But Carlos Sainz had a very bad engine failure that caught flames, meaning that Verstappen would take home P2 in a weekend where Ferrari looked much faster. The next round would be the final nail in the coffin for Ferrari, and Verstappen would take home another win of the season after being consistent. Leclerc would make an error that put him on the wall in France, and Verstappen would go home and take an easy win and yet again dominate, winning by what seems to be minutes at times. You don't even see what he's doing as he's so far ahead of the rest of the field, and many races would lap most of the field. Now, this was the start of Verstappen's most dominant run in his Formula 1 career, where he would win 5 out of 5 races from France all the way to Monza. In Hungary, he would start P10 due to an engine issue, and on the track, where it's normally very hard to overtake, he took home a win, and all this while he'd spun. This race was just before the summer break, and it put him and Red Bull on some very good momentum, and the positivity around the team was all there to see. In Belgium, after the summer break, this was so dominating for Verstappen, who would start P14 due to engine changes, and he would still go on to win by 17 seconds to his teammate Sergio Perez, who was in P2, showing how even though Perez started in P2 and has the same car, Verstappen clearly is in a league of his own. At his home race, it was not that easy, Mercedes having good pace, but some strategy errors meant that Verstappen would win by 4 seconds ahead of George Russell. The next round in Monza, he would start even further back on the grid due to an engine penalty, but again, he would come through the pack to take P1 and would dominate and have a huge gap to Leclerc, but the race finished under a safety car to annoying Italian fans. The next round in Singapore was not a good one for Verstappen, who would not be able to go for the final flying lap, which meant he would start P8. He would also finish P8 after being stuck behind other drivers on a track that is very hard to overtake, and he also made a very rare mistake where he locked up all his tyres and had to box, which meant he would finish nearly a minute behind his teammate Sergio Perez, who won the race. This was a weekend to forget for Max, but in the race which he won to become the champion in a place where greats have been crowned world champion, Suzuka in Japan, Verstappen would start on pole after a very close qualifying session. The race would start and Max would take the lead going into turn 2, and then a red flag came out and the session would not resume for another 2 hours. However, when it did, he dominated and finished almost 30 seconds ahead of anyone else and would win the championship due to Leclerc making a mistake and getting a 5-second penalty, which put Perez into P2 and Leclerc into P3. The confusion was if 4 points should be awarded, then they were the most thought it was half points, but the race and championship was won in a dominating fashion, and a 2-time world champion at 25. What do you think of Max? Was this one of his best seasons from a driver? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe for more awesome Formula 1 content.